It sounds like a big deal because it is. We're doing it with a very simple product, which is we are the leading news by text service in America, which essentially takes news as you know it, removes bias, agenda, clickbait, sensationalism, advertisements, texts just the core facts to you every morning. And so that's the work of our company called informed.now. It's also our website.
Kira, welcome back to the show. How you doing?
Eric, thank you for having me. It's a delight to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to do, so Kira obviously, as mentioned, was on the show before, but do you want to do a quick intro for the people before we get into the question from the last guest and then hop right into the conversation, maybe for those who didn't catch the first one?
Totally. I think that's a great idea. So, Eric, it's amazing to be back. I've been a fan of the show and enjoyed the kind of frank conversations you have with folks around their views on the world. I was really happy to have shared that conversation with you in the past around my current passion and company, our endeavor, which is to really rebuild the information infrastructure of America. It sounds like a big deal because it is. We're doing it with a very simple product, which is we are the leading news by text service in America, which essentially takes news as you know it, removes bias, agenda, clickbait, sensationalism, advertisements, and texts just the core facts to you every morning. And so that's the work of our company called informed.now. It's also our website. Our brand is our website. And that's sort of my passion, my background, and also the context from the previous conversation that anyone should be aware of.
Very nice. So the question from the last guest is, and I will paraphrase it slightly, but not really also. Actually, no, never mind. That almost all economists, whatever their political leanings, agree on one thing, that free trade is good. Why does the general public seemingly not agree?
I don't know if the general public doesn't agree.
Yeah, when I read the question also, by the way, I did some Googling. I think it's probably mixed, but we'll say, well, that's what I was going to paraphrase too. Maybe why would people not agree?
Yeah. And I mean, I think, free trade is generally an understood concept, but I think what people may be against potentially is the tariffs that can be used to regulate uh, trade, and tariffs often have a protectionist um, sort of undertone, where, for example, there's a local couch company right in Wisconsin, and they're doing really well. They're making nice couches, and it's nice. But then there is a huge Chinese company that does couches, and they do them cheaper, faster, better, everything. Like they're just outperforming, and they're able to export to America, those very similar couches for a lot less. And over time, you are going to have a situation where the Wisconsin company is going to go out of business, right? They're not going to be able to compete because all the other guys who want a couch are going to just get the one that's imported from China. And that's a consequence of free trade, because it should be totally cool for an American person to be able to buy a product from another country. And that's what free trade is about. And it's a great thing, right? Because if we could only buy things made in the US, it would also be quite limiting. We wouldn't have a lot of things we already really like, and new things that we might like in the future. And so the conversation of like people not being happy with free trade or having reservations is around, should we be protecting the Wisconsin company? And the way we protect that is by putting tariffs on the Chinese couches and saying, hey, you can't actually make cheaper couches because you're going to have to make them a bit more expensive, right, with the tariff, so that they can compete but not always win with the Wisconsin company, right? And so I think generally speaking, it's really hard to model and to predict whether complete free trade is just like always good, or protecting local industry is always good. It's sort of somewhere, the truth is somewhere in the middle. I tend to think more on the side of free trade. I do think market forces, global market forces, govern what needs to be produced, right? So, okay, maybe this Wisconsin company is going to go out of business, but in the future, no one should be starting a Wisconsin chair company because you already have very strong options from another other countries. And it's not necessarily necessary that Wisconsin should be a chair and couch, sofa company because there or industry because there may be better places to go into, right? And so the market will guide where are their actual gaps. So you're not competing with market leaders and winners in price and winners in value, but that you're actually building what's useful for people, right?
Mm,
Because part of it is also like, hey, well, if you're outcompeted, like I don't know if we need another couch company. And maybe this is a loss for the very local, hyper local economy in Wisconsin. But in reality, maybe you'd be better off building tables because tables, we need the Wisconsin quality, right? There's no good tables coming from anywhere, for example. And so over the long term, the market guides what needs to be built, what needs to be made, and sort of balances and fills in the holes. There's short-term tremors that make people feel upset. So I think long-term free market is a phenomenal thing, and sometimes folks lack that sort of long-termism, long-term vision to see it. Or of course, if they're personally affected by it, there would be a lot of frustration.
yeah. I think for me, the protection piece comes when you're outsourcing cheap labor. So like US companies, for example, could not like if the price of materials was the same for both the Wisconsin company and the Chinese company, then the only difference was, well, the US has labor safety laws and minimum wage laws, etc., and China can use de facto slave labor. um, then it's like, well, that's not very fair. And so then you would want that sort of protection to come in. So yeah, like it's a tough one to kind of say what's the right solution for everything because different industries have different situations and things like that. So yeah,
Totally.
100%. So I wanted to start off the conversation. We had talked maybe a month or two ago about the sourcing for Informed. So just so for people listening, so I subscribe, but here's one of the ones from, I believe this was Friday. The headline is U.S. seizes record large oil tanker off Venezuela carrying 1.1 million barrels. Um, AG Bondi says FBI, DHS, Coast Guard, and Pentagon executed seizure warrant citing tankers' involvement in illicit oil network supporting terrorists. So just like you said, it's straight to the point. There's no like this is good or bad or like that's just what happened.
Yeah,
And then the other thing that comes with it is a link to the article in which you sourced that headline from. So in this one, it's a CNBC article. Again, seems pretty straightforward. It's a couple quotes and whatever else. But um, as we have kind of gone through the last maybe, I don't know, 5 years especially, we've seen outlets that have been kind of caught in some, we'll say, right, the terms malinformation, disinformation, misinformation, especially the term malinformation. I don't know. Do you recall when that term was started to get thrown around? And it was the definition is like true information, but it might not be beneficial for like the broader public or whatever. And they used it in terms of with the COVID vaccine. They're like, well, yeah, it's true that it doesn't actually work, but we don't want people saying it out loud. So, and lots of news people ran with that. So, I wanted to ask you about your sourcing. How do you source what, like, how do you guard against things like that, where maybe certain outlets are more tied with certain leanings or government organizations or things like that? Um, and then as far as sourcing from maybe outside, like the one that we talked about was antiwar.com. Um, but anyways, I'll just leave that all that information out there and then I'll let you go.
totally. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think your question is really important. It's a hard story, and I'm glad you asked it because it's a hard story to tell in the user experience that we offer of essentially a very minimalist product. There isn't too much onboarding. There's no communication. There's just, if you get what we're doing, then right away you're getting the value. And then there's no check-ins, there's no onboarding, there's no like you don't really get bothered, right? Because that's the type of product we're looking to build, and that's the type of user that we are looking to attract is somebody who's like not interested in being bothered with notifications and updates and cookie tracking and privacy invasion and accounts management and all these kind of like you know things we kind of take for granted as when we're subscribed to a product or an experience, but it's pretty noisy. Like it demands more attention than it should. So for our experience, it's hard to tell the story. But here's kind of the full answer to how we source. And I think maybe before even answering, I'll say quickly, Inform.now, right, is a news research company that reads all the news in the world to identify the most world-changing world news and summarizes them in ways that's really accessible, really fast, really concise, so that the person on the receiving end can just pick up a phone in the morning, every morning of every weekday, and read a very, very brief executive summary of what changed the world in the last 24 hours. And it helps you be socially, professionally, interpersonally just informed so that you make decisions not in isolation of reality, but in kind of informed by reality. And it just allows you to read less but know a lot more. So that's the general spirit of what we do. The way we source is really a mix of things that are worth knowing. First is we don't read just a single article. I think that's like a really big and a very natural misunderstanding because clearly there's a link to one article. But we read all the articles on the topic. If, for example, something happened and there's no primary source, right? We would read all the primary reporters on the issue. So if that's CNBC and CNN and AP and you name it, which company, we're going to read all of them to understand and identify the common shared fact base. Like what do people agree on? And that's going to help us understand what is safe to share because that's like commonly agreed upon facts. And obviously it's not just about common agreement, there's more to it. And how do we identify, okay, well, here's the spin part. Here's where they're saying it's a terrible thing, where it's a good thing, where they're trying to influence how you feel about it. That's what we leave aside. And in the end, for simplicity's sake, we can't, give you hundreds of articles, links. It's just not really useful to the person. We pick on a one single one, right? And in that case, that was CNBC. And we pick that based on neutrality, objectivity of the report, right? Whether, first of all, they had the information from a reporting level, meaning they're not reposting it from somebody else, which a lot of journalist companies do. That's like what most of them do most of the time. But they actually had reporters on the ground. And like they have the information from like a primary evidence standpoint. We look at that, we really prioritize kind of like who had the horse's mouth. And the second piece is that, if it's talking in a very biased way, very like agitated way, we can't really use that, right? And so we're looking for the most neutral and the most primary report from an outlet, right? In that case, that's CNBC. But our summary isn't just based on that one report, it's based on hundreds, right? If not thousands of reports on the same subject. It's just we only cite one for the person to read more. One of the things that we're really proud of, and that's like a huge focus for us, is that we have a huge obsession with primary sources. So what I'm talking about right now is cases where there is no primary source. Like there's no horse's mouth, so to speak. There's just sort of like you have reporters on the ground, well, that's on Wall Street Journal, or on whether that's on Wall Street, right, trading floor, or in Afghanistan, or in Iran, or in Israel, right? That's when there's no primary source. There is primary reporting. Many times, and we are lucky, or we're proud rather, to have a lot of these cases where sometimes, two-thirds, if not 80% of our coverage comes from primary sources. And what that means very simply is, if there's a report or a statement, right, say by the White House, right, we're not going to bring a journalist company to tell us about it. We'll just take it directly from the White House. It doesn't make it the truth, but we're saying here's what was said, and we're linking you directly to the horse's mouth, right? If there's updates in employment rates, in inflation, in various like labor statistics, which really is important and newsworthy, we're not going to take that from CNBC. Like in that case, I think CNBC is a good example because they always publish about it. We're not going to take it from them. Why would we? Because this comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from the central bank, from various types of census reports. We'll rather take that from the primary source, right? If it's a Supreme Court case, we will take it from the Supreme Court. If it's a bill of Congress being passed, if it's a UN report, we'll take it from the primary source. And that's sort of a lost art in the journalism world where folks have really stopped sort of reading the primary sources and definitely stopped citing them for the end user. We treat our user as a mature adult that they are, right? So we don't shy away from saying, here is the original document, here's the Supreme Court case opinion, right? Here is the stay, here's the motion, here is the bill of Congress, so that you can interact with the horse's mouth directly. You can meet the horse. So anyway, I know I said a lot and I blabbered, but there's there's a lot of thinking that we do on this topic,
Yeah.
and it's our primary value.
Yeah. Have you guys, is Substack a place where you go for, because there's, and where I'm getting at with this question is, instead of like an organization, there might be an individual journalist who used to work at CNN or whatever, and now they are independent on Substack and they're still doing investigative journalism, but they're not, like, you wouldn't find their stuff on like anywhere other than Substack, for instance. Is that something that you guys have looked at as well? Like, for example, Matt Taibbi is one that comes to mind as a independent investigative journalist.
Yeah.
Um, he's one that comes to mind. Is that something that you guys have looked at?
Um, we're definitely open to it. We have not come across any journalist whose independent coverage would like make us feel like, oh, we need his stuff in there. Like, oh, we
Mm,
need this guy's stuff. I think part of it is because we focus on world-changing world news, right? So not necessarily political investigation or not necessarily like cultural um and what's the word? Anthropology. Like we're looking very specifically at like a really large scale phenomenon, right? That's affecting, hundreds of thousands or millions of people and are from fundamentally changing the course of their life, whether that's by changing their freedom, safety, optionality, just option set in the first place. How does it affect that? War and peace, large scale revolution, huge changes in consumer behavior or in employment. And that type of scale of update comes less from independent, rogue is a strong word here, but like I mean rogue in a good way, right?
yeah.
It's less from like the rogue rebel like independent journalist that's doing investigations, and it comes much more from again primary sources, right? Because that's so much of our share of our coverage that sort of doesn't even involve other journalists, doesn't involve other reporters. And in cases where we do need other reports, usually it relies on reporting, which is a little bit different from investigative journalism. And it's a little bit different from journalism itself. And that's literally people who don't write articles, but they're on the ground collecting primary evidence, information, doing like these interviews with war victims, doing interviews with the women in Afghanistan, right, that are being oppressed by the Taliban, or with the traders on the New York Stock Exchange that are like, seeing potentially a tumult in the market, right? That's consequential. And that reporting muscle isn't just limited to large corporations. It's actually owned by a handful of them. And an individual, kind of what I'm calling a rogue reporter, doesn't really have the ability, right, to be in all these places. When I talk about this handful of companies that have kind of their pulse on the primary evidence, I'm talking specifically about the newswire news agency part of the industry, which is essentially the wholesale layer of news industry. Companies that are selling news to other companies to write about, right? Because the funny thing is, Fox News and CNN and CNBC, both sides get their news from the same place, right? They get their news from this news agency layer, right? And they put their own spin on it, right? Fox talks in one tone, one language. CNN, CNBC, name whoever you want from the other side of the political spectrum, talks about issues in a different way. but the facts are actually coming from the same source, and it's this very small group of companies that essentially own the reporting muscle of the world.
Mm,
And I would say it's Associated Press, not on the retail level, but the
yeah.
newswire version, which we as normal people don't see. It's AFP, which is a large European company that is one of the bigger ones in this world. Bloomberg, Reuters, I believe BBC also gets into that category, and they essentially sell news to other news companies. Right? It's basically wholesale, right? We reach, we interact with the retail level, right? Which already has the spin and the commentary and the agenda and the bias and the advertisement and the sensationalism all layered in there. But the wholesale layer has that primary reporting. And that's essentially who we try to consult when we don't have a primary source.
Mm. I have two thoughts based on what you said, and they're not super related, but maybe kind of. The
Yeah,
first one is that have you guys looked at having like a local option? So if I'm in America, I can have my world six bullet points, and then I can toggle on like also I want the six for America or whatever. Have you guys looked at an option like that? And then the second one is, and the reason I ask is because I know I'm guessing, and I think based, if I recall correctly, you guys use AI to kind of sort through a lot of the stuff quickly. It's not all human kind of that can go through 1,000 articles super quickly. Um, and then the second one is, and this is obviously a very unique example, but in Gaza, the IDF slash Israel hasn't really let journalists in there. And that, at least in America, that issue is very, very, very divided on like what you get in terms of depending on who you listen to, you'll get one story, and if you listen to somebody else, you'll get another one. And then you've got people from the Israeli government saying one thing, and it's tough to actually figure out kind of not exactly what's going on, but like to some extent with like people not being allowed in there, journalists not being allowed in there, it's a bit tough to get like sourcing from that perspective. So I'll leave both those thoughts there. You can like talk about how you see that both of those situations going, and yeah.
totally. I mean, one of the things that we really focus on is we don't report on things that we don't know or that we don't feel complete like confidence on.
Hmm.
And so, I would struggle to call us a source that like, will give you the deep down, you know, deep investigation, kind of all this like rich story. That's something that, our user generally doesn't have the time to do,
Yeah.
and if they do, it's necessarily going to involve multiple sources. Like you can't just rely on a single source. You're gonna have to kind of go and do your own investigation in many ways. But what we report on is essentially what is known to be factual, right? Like we essentially stick to the facts, and we don't say what to think or what to feel or like whether what's going on with some sort of Israeli policy decisions or some sort of Gaza government responses or military actions. We don't comment on whether that's a good or bad thing. We don't comment on how you should feel or think about it. We sort of share what we know to be factual, and sometimes that leaves a lot of like we don't answer, I don't think, all your questions, right? It's like I think there are questions that an everyday person would have about the Israel Gaza conflict that we just won't be able to answer because we focus on the facts. But to answer some of these questions that people have, you need, you need history. You need to study history. You need to figure out what's going on. You need to read a lot more than a text message, so to speak. And so I don't think that's an area that we want to grow into in terms of like being a much richer, like owning richer stories that give you like more of like a research report. I don't believe that's like a direction we want to move into. And so in some ways it's limiting us a little bit, but intentionally so, that we want to serve this very specific layer of like giving you the briefing, but not the full dossier, right? On your other question around sort of the future of personalization for Inform.now, the way I think of it is, there are better places to go for very specific niche interests, right? If you're like interested in sports, if you're interested in specifically Supreme Court news, there are places that are so much more specialized and so so much better than we could do, right? Because if your interest is really niche and really deep, you probably also want more than a text message about it, right?
Hmm.
So we don't particularly know if we want to play in these like hyper specific kind of curations. But what we are working on, there's another reason, and it's the echo chambering. We don't really like philosophically how social media and legacy media to such a degree has created worlds where people can sort of live in their own um, delusions, right? And America, I think, really enables that, right? There's actually a movie that came out recently. It's a very popular movie called Bugonia, and it's a bit of a science fiction, a bit of a thriller. It's an interesting film, but it actually captures, and I think it won some awards for capturing this part of America where you know our world, American uh, culture, society really allows people to live in their own like fantasy. And I think a huge part of it is to do with echo chambers, where the social media echo chambers that get created allow you to read the news or read any content that you already believe in and that you're already like that's just reaffirming your worldview. Sometimes that worldview can be very malinformed, right? Or misinformed or disinformed. There's all these like terms, but it could be just like it needs balancing, it needs correcting, it needs like more information. And when you create this echo chamber and you dwell in it, it's very hard then to relate to other people's opinions, have conversations about culture, politics, ideas, economy with other people in a civil way because you're so self-assured and convinced in this like chamber because that's all the content you consume everywhere. It's philosophically problematic and I think is dangerous. And I think we here have this ability to build the most effective echo chamber of all time. And we're hesitant to do that because I think when you read news, there should be part, at least news wise, right? Entertainment is different. We don't touch entertainment. When you read news, you shouldn't be able to control what you read, right? Because if you are able to fully control it, then you're very much building that echo chamber. You should be a little bit surprised, right? Like the news comes out and like, oh wow, I never thought of this, or I didn't think of this. This wasn't on my radar, but this is important, and I'm glad I know this. I think that's the the service and part of the value of a news company is to show you things that aren't necessarily in your peripheral vision. Um, and I think that's really important. So those are some philosophical kind of musings. That being said, we are looking not to hyper personalize to the individual. We are looking to launch thematic products that are building on our engine that is a mix of technology and talent, which is just how I call our team of experts, mix of technology and expertise maybe, and apply it to different spheres, right? So you're suggesting the localization of, for example, like news of Pittsburgh, right? News of San Francisco.
I don't even
Uh,
know if it has to be that local, but even
yeah,
to like country level.
yeah. Well, I feel like in some ways we're currently a little bit doing that because there is a bit of a over over coverage on the American side, right? And we only serve America and Canada. So to
Mm.
a degree where this is the American version of the product. And I think where we're going to go next is build like a more global, British, European, different kind of flavors. I think that's on the map. I do think that's something that we want to do. Um, right now, we're so focused on getting this flagship product right, which is the product of, you know, it's designed for an American who considers herself a global citizen. And so it's world news, but it does, I would say, like err on the side of America quite a bit, right? So you're always informed of all the big American things and a dose of world stuff as well.
Mm. Well, then I'll flip the question then about expanding to like Europe, for instance, and
Hmm.
having it be like that way. Because then the other kind of piece of that is, well, you're building a business and you don't have advertising, and so you've got to have people paying for it. And so at some point, from a from a marketing perspective for you, how has that gone in terms of getting funding from people, um, like from the startup side? conversion rate on subscriptions, how long are people staying subscribed, or like a feedback loop from that perspective from the consumer.
Totally. Well, it's worth mentioning to any listeners who haven't heard our previous conversation that we refuse, we don't accept revenue from anybody but our reader, and that's part of the philosophical, but also very sane business reasoning of like if you accept revenue from external clients that are beyond the reader, you're going to wind up optimizing for them. And we're looking to only optimize our news for our reader. So we refuse advertiser revenue, any sort of sponsorship revenue, any sort of investments or outside capital, right? Because that also has a pressure to it. Any sort of platform, pressures like from social media that we would dwell on, we refuse all of that, right? We refuse any sort of input or contribution from any sort of dependence on anyone but our reader. So philosophically, we are really, really loyal to only our reader, and we walk that walk by only accepting subscriptions from them. It allows us to be really aligned with our reader, right? Because if we don't have readers paying subscriptions for us, we don't have a business. And frankly, we shouldn't exist because we built this business for the subscriber. And if the subscriber reader isn't willing to participate, willing to pay, willing to support, we shouldn't exist. It's that simple. I don't take it personally. This is not the right solution then. Um, and so I'll mention, just again for folks who don't know, our subscriptions are $9 a month, or $99 a year, and um, that's it. It's that simple. It's easy, really easy to stop. You just text stop if you are done with it, and it's just a very simple format of supporting the work, supporting the engine that we run, and the kind of the team that works every day to deserve your trust. Um, well, that's sort of the business side of our business. It's very simple. It's really quite straightforward on purpose. It's very minimalist. Um, the product is definitely cheaper than it should be. We get that a lot from our users. It also is probably a little cheaper than it needs to be. But that's because we want it to be accessible to everybody. Like we just want anybody to be able to benefit from the power of facts, from the power of making up their own mind. And $100 per year is, I think, a pretty digestible amount for students alike, as same as professionals across the spectrum. So it's a bit of a public service project too. We're kind of replacing PBS and NPR defunding. So you asked me a few more questions around kind of like certain metrics. We have really good retention. A lot of people, when they find us, they don't really leave because they really like our work, even though we are the easiest to leave. You don't need to remember a password. You don't need to go cancel your billing. You don't need to like worry about getting out. You don't need to like double click all these things. It's so simple. You just text the word stop and everything's done automatically from there. So despite it being so easy to leave, people don't really leave once they discover us, which is really awesome. Um, we don't carry free users, so we give folks a free trial to see if this is the power they would like to have in their pocket. But we don't carry free users. We don't have a free tier. It's paid only, and that helps us. Obviously, it limits us a little bit because I think it would be powerful to have free users, and it'd be good to have that tier to just like spread that power. But it's a little bit expensive for us. With folks not supporting us, it has costs for us. And I would say number two is I think it confuses us a lot because if we have certain profiles of people, right? For example, like we have students and they're like not willing to pay. Um, we should know that. We should know that our product is not for students, right? Because maybe they experience this problem, but they like don't experiencing enough to pay for it, right? Or for example, these are people who are working in the service industry and they like it, but not enough to pay for it. The fact that we don't carry a free tier doesn't confuse our image of the target user, so that the people we see are like, oh, these are our people, and that helps us a lot with our go-to-market, our marketing efforts, and just our idea of like attracting our target user, like the person that we're building for. Having only a paid tier helps narrow down that profile and give us a lot of clarity around who that person is.
So The question that comes then to my mind is in terms of funding to get the whole thing up and running. Is that, and if you don't want to get into that because of it's too inside baseball or whatever, that's fine too. But like, is that something that you did personally, or how did that work? Because you've got, like you said, a team that's scattered kind of throughout. And if you're like starting off and you've got three, four, five customers paying $9 a month, like that's nothing in terms of paying a team to do all the research and find the articles and find the sources and do the rest of it. So how did all that work and how did you guys get up and running? I don't think we talked about that the last time.
No, no.
And I realized that afterwards I was like, huh, I forgot to ask that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's an important one too, because a lot of folks, maybe in the audience, who are thinking about running, building a solution, building something, that's the number one question: is with what money? I've had a mildly successful career leading up to this project, and that's given me a good amount of personal runway to dedicate to this and invest in this. And it felt really important, and I knew that this would be money well spent, and that I kind of knew what to do with the money. So I bootstrapped it, right? That's like the term that we use in, like, I don't know how common it is outside of venture and like startup circles, but we bootstrapped the company, which basically means we didn't raise outside capital to maintain the independence. And initially it was definitely like a jump, but we also didn't start with having a big team. Even now, we don't really have a big team. We started gradually with just what we needed. And we also started very aggressively marketing the product and getting more and more users to come in and support it, to see the value. And so, it was built like a house of cards, kind of like cards where had to be placed at the same time so that they stick. And it's definitely a science, but I think it's more of an art than a science. And we are lucky to have a business model that is inherently, profitable, right? Because we have folks sponsoring the work, but through, our internal efficiency in our process, which, like, I'm a very systems oriented person. I would say generally, like, our costs of operating are on the lower side, right? And so we're able to do a lot with very little, and we reach profitability pretty early in our kind of business life.
That makes sense. What kind of marketing sorts of strategies do you use? Because again, I think as far as I know, you guys are the only ones that are doing that have this kind of are filling this kind of niche, however you pronounce it, in the news world.
Yeah,
And so, like when you said you marketed aggressively at the very beginning, like what kinds of numbers as far as users, like are you like how widespread are you getting? Like if I go out, if I go to the grocery store and I throw a bag of chips at somebody, like is that person going to have informed? Like, are you talking that kind of widespread that quickly, or like where are your pain points from that perspective? Because in terms of finding a target user, right, like you mentioned, students are one kind of demographic. Then you've got maybe the older generation that still watches on TV, and so it does feel like there's some limits on your user base from that perspective, but to already reach profitability from very early on also means that the expansion had to be at least somewhat big quite quickly. So, and again, if these numbers are too inside baseball, of course you don't have to share, but I'm just for my own curiosity, like I would be curious to know what percentage of people actually kind of are interested in this sort of thing and how it's grown.
totally. Well, we kind of tried everything under the sun in the beginning. Um, one of our biggest limitations when it comes to like marketing and spreading you know, growing the product is we really hate advertisements. Like, we really hate it, which is why we sort of built that was part of the frustration with the news that led me to feel like, oh, I really am quite tired of being solicited when I read news. And I'm just personally have a huge vendetta against advertisement. I just like, hate it so much. I hate like the attention grabbing, kind of attention jeopardizing, attention terrorizing experience of advertisement. And so it would be weird for us to run advertisements, right? Like, I think we're thinking of like ways to do it creatively where it doesn't feel like advertisement, where it feels Like we're telling a story in a thoughtful and engaging and fun way, but we don't do traditional advertisement. And so that's definitely been a big limiter. Um, I think we might be changing that now a little bit, like thinking, where else can we not bother people, but still tell our story? But that's been a bit limiter. So what have we done? A lot of it really comes from our referral program. Like, so we are kind of looking for our people through people that are already in the circle, and so that's something that we care a lot about. And we run a very generous referral program that rewards folks who bring the right kind of fit people to us, and that's like a really big channel for us. So word of mouth, I guess that's pretty synonymous with what I mentioned. We also do a good amount of like organic reach where we talk about the mission on social media, right? And so I did it personally myself, the rest of the team, and just we're really active on LinkedIn and becoming more and more active on other social media platforms. But I would say even initially, LinkedIn was really helpful and like the single source of our spread very early on of our growth. So that's probably the single most specific answer is social media, telling our story in a non-advertising way, but organically just sharing about our story. Moving forwards, we're really leaning into kind of more social media across all types, from Twitter to TikTok to Reddit, etc. Um, So I think that's been a really big part of the story. We've done a lot of like small fun experiments. We've done like signs and posters around cities. We've actually tried like a lot of in-person experiences. One of the things that we're designing now that I really want to kind of bring to fruition is I want to have a little pop-up in like a big city like New York or Chicago or somewhere where there's like a lot of, there's like a busy area that um, people a lot of just what's the word? A lot of crowding happens. When I have this experience of like having a gate, right? That's designed, right? And it's like the informed gate. And as you go through it, you kind of go from like being uninformed or malinformed. And it's maybe like a set of gates. And as you walk through the whole, like kind of like almost like a museum experience, as you walk through the whole thing, you get the free trial at the end, right? It's like, hey, like you made the active, conscious choice to walk through these gates. Like you could have walked anywhere else. You get a free trial for informed, and you can see the power of what it means to walk through these gates intentionally. Like I want to be informed. I don't want to be overwhelmed. I don't want to be influenced. I don't want to be drained. And doing like pop-ups like that experiences. One of the other things we're thinking about is a drone show that would sort of tell the story visually of what we care about, and then also say, hey, like this is informed.now, right? And sort of spell out our story and our image in the skies, literally. I think what I'm describing here is called stunt marketing,
Yeah, yeah.
which is a little different, but I think something that could be really fun. So I'm thinking a lot more around that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you been on, I know when we first chatted, you had been kind of searching for podcasts to go on and different things like that. How have you found that in terms of one, describing what it is that you guys do? I would imagine at some point after you've had a conversation maybe similar to this one or the first one that we had for the like 100th time, you're kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that anymore because I'm repeating myself over and over again. But how have you found the podcast circuit generally, if you've been if you found success doing it? Like I haven't gone looking to see if you've been on other stuff really. So that question, maybe the premise might be wrong, but
No,
have you
no.
found success with that as well?
Yeah, that's it's funny. I didn't, we're on a podcast right now, but I didn't mention the podcast channel. That for us has been a really good way because it's not advertisement. Like people go to hear a conversation and they want to hear about the philosophy and the thinking and like the spirit behind it, and it's long form, right? So it's like if people really want to hear the story, people want to learn about it, it's a great way to do it. But it's not like pushed onto you. It's not something you get in your feed or something that's like, forced on you through an advertisement. So I love podcasts. I love sharing kind of what we're doing, our mission. I love talking to you. Doing a second time. Clearly we like each other.
Yeah, yeah, just a little bit.
And I know I do a fair amount of these now. We've only started this a few months ago as an idea and as a kind of, I don't know if it's a channel per se, but it's something that we, do and I spend a lot of time on, and I really enjoy it. I think it helps me articulate the story of like it helps me connect the dots, right? Because so much of the day-to-day life of building a company is so chaotic and messy, and you don't really know like it's just chaos. And sometimes I get in these conversations and I like get to connect the dots of like what are we doing, why are we doing this, how are we doing it. And so I find it really helpful, and we do get a lot of people who listen to podcasts and feel like they identify with the problem. They wind up going and giving us a try and checking us out. So it's also been a nice tool for discovery, not like a huge major tool by any means, but something that is a nice byproduct of having a good rich conversation.
Yeah. How have you felt personally in terms of like when you guys launched? I guess maybe this question is a little bit uh old news since you guys have already been relatively profitable. But in terms of launch, were you nervous at all about bootstrapping the whole thing on your own in terms of like, okay, yeah, maybe you have the runway to be able to fund this and it's not gonna you're not gonna get so much pain from it if it doesn't work. But like how were you in terms of risk, right? Because before when you're in VC world, it's other people's money and now it's yours. So it's a little bit
Totally.
different.
And it's why I think it requires even more conviction, right?
Hmm.
I think both really require a lot of conviction just because, you know, other people's money is not your own. It's borrowed money and it really is their money. And like stewarding other people's investment is should be nerve-wracking. And it is nerve-wracking.
Yes.
And so the you need a conviction either way, whether you're stewarding other people's money or your own. In my case, I had a lot of conviction, right? Because one is like I am someone who's financially minded, and I can build models, and I can kind of see into I can build tools and frameworks that help me feel like I'm looking into the future, right? Which is just basic financial modeling of like seeing, okay, well, what things need to be true for the whole operation to succeed financially, and then do I believe these things are possible? And if you do believe that the things that need to be true are possible within a certain timeline, you can come with certain conviction. You can have multiple scenarios, like, hey, like best case, medium case, worst case, right? If you believe that you can feasibly get to medium case within a certain period of time, you've got a financial model that's giving you conviction of like, yeah, this is a sane idea and it should work. And then the rest is just up to hard work, but it's not being delusional. So obviously, there's been a lot of that. I'm definitely a planner, a calculator, a person who likes to sort of strategize. Um, but another thing, that's kind of third thought here is I've had a very personal conviction in this, apart from the modeling, apart from the, just the being comfortable with the stakes because it's, my own money, not borrowed money. Um, I just said like, hey, if this doesn't work out, like, will I do good for the world? Like, will I help a few people? And the answer was like, yeah, like I'll probably like help a few hundred, a few thousand people, even if this doesn't work out, right? If like we're not able to get this to a place where it's really, a huge, blossoming business, I'll have helped some people. And that's very much been like, I don't know, um, a joy in itself. Like, what else am I gonna spend money on? Like going to bars? Like I'd rather, yeah, like put some money into this and actually help some folks, right? And it goes hand in hand with like you only make money if you are able to be helpful to people. So to me, that helpfulness was something I was very sure of. It's like, even if this doesn't work out, I will have done a good thing. So that sort of gave me even more confidence.
Does that come from, because I think speaking from the outside of VC world, kind of looking into it, there's a lot of what it looks like to me, like philanthropic type actions that go on within kind of that world occasionally. Is it part like where did the where did the jump ship from VC world to I want to do my own thing and help people with this particular problem set? Because there's a lot of different ways that you could have gone about um, the news is a problem. Like there are so many ways that you could have gone to, whether it was like funding sort of the independent journalists like we were talking about before, or starting like, for example, a Tim Pool or Patrick Bet-David type news company themselves, which I would imagine would have been quite more expensive. So maybe that had something to do with it. There's a lot of different ways that you could have gone about doing it. And the helping people part is an interesting aspect because the way that I view informed personally is almost it's like dipping the toe in. Like if you really want to know what's going on, informed is not enough to me. Like personal opinion, right? As we mentioned, one text is not enough to like understand why something happened in the world. You have to do a deep dive and like you said, learn the history and do all these other things. So how did you settle on that sort of, well,
Absolutely.
how did the thought process go from where you were in VC to here?
Totally. Yeah, I think, I'm not suggesting this is the only problem that's, worth solving. And there's so many other things that are great and worth solving. I think for me, it was personal. I thought like what would be a perfect solution for me, right? And then obviously I've tested that and validated with like larger samples and more testing of like, do other people want the same thing? But I think for me personally, I wanted a very minimalist product. I wanted something that like just does the job of giving me the facts. And I was passionate about that problem specifically. Like I didn't want to, do more investigative journalism. I didn't want to do deeper dives. Like I felt like there there are many solutions and there are many providers that do a really good job at these many other problems. The one that felt most broken to me is just like if I just want to get the facts and nothing else, and I want to get it conveniently, accessibly, simply, there's nowhere to go. And you know, like you can go and do it, but it's very energy, time, attention consumptive. And so it's not really feasible in the day-to-day life. And I think I've also observed and interacted with and tested with many people who sort of don't have their toes dipped, right? And I feel like, wow, they would really benefit from knowing what's going on around them in their environment. Um, they would benefit from it, and they want to. They just are very intimidated and very overwhelmed and very drained, and rightly so, because the systems are all those things by the legacy solutions. And so for me, it was about you know, trying to welcome a new generation of curious people who want to be informed. They just have no tolerance for being influenced, for being
Mm,
solicited, for being manipulated, for being overwhelmed, for being drained. So that is the problem that sort of, got me excited. And I would say, I don't know if there are other problems in the news media world that I was particularly passionate about, right? Like I'm not really like a long form investigative journalist type. I think there are also great providers of that. So this was a very specific kind of niche problem, or not a niche, but like it was a problem that spoke to me a lot. And I would say my interest wasn't transferable to the rest of the media world and its problems. It was very specifically on like welcoming people into the world of caring.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Welcoming people into the world of caring. I like that. Do you have then the natural follow-on, at least for me, would be how do you get them into the world of caring? So in terms of your business, are there or have there been thoughts on like, okay, now that we've got people to care, we can send them or we can make a course on how to read or how to not get influenced by bias in media, for instance. Like if somebody wants to go do a deeper dive, then informed now like has based on your business model, but we're gonna teach them how to avoid bias in the media and we're gonna make like a crash course on things to watch out for, or we're gonna make a crash course on like we get our sourcing for Supreme Court news from these 10 sources, and if you want to go deep dive, like this is the place to go, or things like that. Has that been something that you guys have considered? Because kind of that's the piece for me where, yeah, you welcome people to care, but then they have to go do it more, which is outside of your purview at your
Yeah,
current business model.
yeah. I would say it's I don't want to, suggest what the right thing is to do for people, right? It's like I think there is a really important gap in like just that initial dipping of toes that like we just want to really master and like be the gateway drug into
Yeah.
news. We want to be someone who's able to like welcome generation, like especially the young generation, like Gen Z and Alpha, like their tolerance for bullshit is so low, which is I think great, right? And like
Yeah.
they're not gonna be able to read, our parents and our generation's legacy media. They're just like they're gonna throw up, right? They're like, I can't do this, right? So we want to like build for them in many ways, right? It's like, removing all this clutter. Anyway, I digress. I do think to answer your question, it's like I do think it will be biting off much more than we can chew if we
Mm,
were to try to do the whole kind of ecosystem of like turning some dude into a global citizen identifying person, right? Like I think that's a personal journey, and we don't want to impose or overstep into that whole realm. Although I really like your idea around doing like education sessions, like webinars for folks who care or who want to care. There's no reason why we can't show them some of the ropes that we use, and
hmm
how do you take next steps, or how do you even take the steps that we take on your own.
Exactly. Yeah.
It takes time, it's not easy, but you can learn to do it just so that you have the skill. um, I think those are really good ideas, and I'm gonna brew on them. But I think focus is really important for our product, for our platform, for our strategy, for just our whole endeavor. And I think I'm very hesitant to sort of like bite off the whole workflow of taking a person from living, with their head in the sand to being a very globally aware, informed individual who's also taking all these actions and is politically, culturally, socially involved. Like that's a very personal journey, right?
Yeah.
And we just want to say like, hey, we are for readers who maybe don't want to like care or be particularly involved, but they just want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to do that too and not alienate those people.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. That makes sense. That makes sense. And exactly like you said, it's teaching people the steps that you take to get there in terms of, I think that would be something maybe, I don't know, over the course of time that might be a good, or it might be a natural next kind of step, the webinar type deal. Like this is how we discern who's full of nonsense and who's not, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but yeah, I think I mean this the kind of specialty that you guys have landed in, like you said, the gateway to caring, I think, yeah, it's super important. And like you said, the younger generations are, well, we're not that old, but the younger generations are like the tolerance for nonsense is extremely low on a variety of levels to the point where sometimes they just check out completely, which is also not great. Um, and so there's going to be a generation of people that somehow need to be reached to have a stake in the future of like themselves, family, etc., and not just end up in a opioid video game like pot smoking future where nothing happens because that I don't think that's a controversial thing to say is probably already happening. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah, I mean I really like what you guys are doing from that perspective and I hope it works to that because part of me is very concerned about that sort of scenario that I just laid out. I don't know if you've seen that or seen the stories yourself, but I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
totally. I mean, I do think in a world that is by default extremely overwhelming, a very natural response is to like, resign and retract and sort of like, hey, I don't want to be part of this. It's very draining. And I do think our world also kind of combining the earlier thing I mentioned of like the echo chambering of America, right? I mean, literally like word of the year, echo chamber, like I think word of the last decade, but
Hmm.
especially the last couple of years. Um, I do think that like our culture, our world, being America specifically, that's what I'm talking about, allows for it. Like it enables it. It enables you to live in isolation in your little hole. Um, and it doesn't it like and it enables that. And I think that's very dangerous. Like on one hand, it overwhelms you, and your other, you know, you're likely to resign and kind of like go and hide. But then it also enables your isolation and your hiding and your alienation. And I think it's just it's a very dangerous mix. And unfortunately, it's hard to deny that we have that in America. And so, yeah, I'm not excited about this. I do think it can be fixed. I'm not sure how.
You optimistic about the future, pessimistic, little of both?
Extremely optimistic. I've always been the biggest optimist. I mean, I've had a I've had a tough life, and I've had a lot of shit happen, and like you either come out of that being you either come out of that being broken and completely like destroyed, or you don't really come out of it, or you come out of that really optimistic and be like, hey, like we got this. Things are gonna go well. I definitely came out on the latter side. I really believe in a very bright future for everyone. In fact, I believe in hard work. I don't believe it happens by default. I don't believe anything happens by default. You have to work hard for it. But I do think if you are a hardworking person who works for their luck and has ideas and is open to acting on them, has courage, can summon courage, I believe in great things for everyone. I think we're living through really transformative technological times that are going to do so much good, some bad, I think for sure. No denying. It's hard for me to weigh how much more of which, but I think there's going to be so much good coming from the technological waves we are in the middle of. I think there's going to be so much good coming from the globalization that continues to accelerate. I think there's a lot of naughty things and tough things happening in the world, but I don't think they're permanent. And I do believe in like the fundamental goodness of the world. I think that's probably the optimism in me as well. Um, so I'm very excited for what's happening. I'm very excited for my generation, our generation, for future generations. I'm just really just happy to be here, worldwide.
That's good, man. That's good. If you had a magic wand and could kind of right the ship, right? We've, based on offline conversations and previous conversations, I think we've identified kind of, well, a lot of them are not that hard to identify, the problems that are existing. But if you had a magic wand and kind of, right, not maybe full prescriptions or solutions, but mo more general type things, what would be the pathway to kind of righting the ship? We'll say for America and maybe Western, like the West more broadly. What are some things that come to mind for you?
I think the loneliness epidemic is a really big one. I think it connects with kind of like many other hurts or damages that we're like sustaining. But I think the loneliness epidemic is a really important one. I think the it's a Scott Galloway term, or it's my term describing Scott Galloway's work, but like the masculinity crisis, I think is also like a really big and important one. I obviously think like education has been taking a beating recently, and I think that's going to come back to bite us big time. I think we need to continue to invest a lot in education. I think I think free trade. I think there's just there's so many things, but I think there are big issues to tackle, right? Some of the things I mentioned, but they're all solvable. Like these are all problems that we just created for ourselves through our history. Like we can also solve them. Like none of these things have to exist. We don't need to have the loneliness epidemic. We don't need to have all these things. We are magical creatures, and we can absolutely like get this done. We just need to, I think, put a little bit more effort in. I don't know if that was the spirit of your question. I
Yeah,
don't know if you need to prescribe a solution or articulate the problems that I'm paying attention to. I kind of did more of the latter, but
yeah. Well,
I think
I think the first three for sure. And a lot of that is Right, you gotta go, especially the first one. You gotta go touch grass, talk to people. But I think that's tough for for people when, like, I experience this sometimes as well, where like you're going out to some sort of event, and it feels like there's all these unspoken social rules. And for me personally, it's like, well, I just like to talk to people. So once I get in a conversation, I'm kind of good. But it's like those first 15, 20 minutes where you kind of are, especially where you don't know a lot of people, you don't know who's interested in what and the lay of the land. It's easier to not experience those first 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever than it is to go through that. But then, of course, once you get through that, then it's very fruitful, generally speaking. But I think facing that uncomfortability is super important. And then I think that goes into the second one as well. And then the third one, the education piece, I mean, yeah, I agree. And I just don't even know what to do at that point. Like I have no solutions for that because other than it being way more like localized, like there, at least in the US, there's been an uptick in homeschooling. There's been an uptick in Montessori schooling and different things. Like people are checking out of the public education system. Um, and I think probably rightfully so. So then it's like kind of like, well, what do you do at that point? Because not everybody can afford those other options or has the time to do the homeschooling or that sort of thing. And then you don't want it to be where public schooling is looked on as a negative, right, in terms of a have and have not situation, because that I don't think is a that's not a recipe for success either. Um, And the same thing with the university system. I mean there's a lot to go through there, but I think generally speaking I agree um with those first three for sure. I don't know, do you have thoughts on how to solve those, the first three specifically?
No, I mean, yeah, I feel like these are could be entire podcasts of their own where we could
Oh, for
really,
sure. Yeah. But just like general points, like things that you do, right? Because
yeah,
you've gone, you talk to people as part of what your job is. You're talking about going to do pop-up shops and things like that. So in terms of loneliness, like, and when you feel it, just from your own perspective, it doesn't have to be prescriptions, but if somebody's listening and you had like a little tidbit of advice to say, oh, somebody's feeling lonely or some or whatever, like, what would you do?
you know, I do really relate to the problem that you kind of painted, which I think is definitely adjacent to and like very similar to the loneliness epidemic, but the fact that like the social infrastructure of our world, and this is beyond just America, but just like generally, like the social infrastructure is not designed for social connection, right? Like there's nothing about being in a bar or in like a nightlife venue or in a club or in places like that or in a restaurant that facilitates socializing. It facilitates something completely different. It facilitates you buying food, buying drinks, buying whatever sort of like access ticket, and maybe you're witnessing something like a concert or a show. Um, Maybe you're consuming something like drinks or food, but you're mostly pushed to consumption. You're not actually. These aren't interactive spaces, and so there are very few spaces. And definitely, I'll just name America, where people can actually come together to talk. Right, like nowhere can you go. The average everyday person can they go to just like talk to strangers. Like it's just not available. Like bars are not designed for that. Like you can probably do it in a bar, right? That's where people go, but the environment is designed against that. You're constantly pushed to drink to inhibit so many of your functions and so much of your best judgment and your memory, right? You're in an environment that is sort of like you need to have a lot of courage to speak up because it's very cold actually. Like these are very cold. There's a lot of distance between people, and there's
100%.
noise. There's noise like the noise, like the background, the sound, TVs playing with those news anchors that we love. Um, and it's just an antisocial space, right? Like, why would that be the default of how people meet and interact? It's disgusting. I mean, it's just so not mindfully designed. So I think there's going to be a rewriting of these social rules. And I actually see a lot of that in California, which excites me. I spent a lot of time in California, and they are rewriting those rules. They are creating spaces where you can come to socialize without any concern for alcohol or overstimulating experiences that are people like are there to consume, concerts or performances. No, you actually come to these gathering spaces to meet other strangers, and it's a beautiful thing. So I think social rules are going to be rewritten by the current generation, by the next generation, to fit more of actually like being able to connect and build communities. I think there's a lot of rise in community building. Like I run a community personally; it's a really important passion project of mine. It's called Circuit, and I know a lot of other people who do, and there's like a real rise in community building. And so things it's already being rewritten. It's already happening. I only wish it happened faster, right? And if
Yeah.
you find a space, a community that you like, or a venue or a space that you like, to accelerate this, go and help them, right? That's my advice to a person. Like find a space that you admire and you feel like, oh, like this, they're doing it right, and go help them do it. And, introduce more of those options because like I don't want the next generation to have to meet at a bar or in a club, right? It's when you have to it's not optimal. It's not optimal. It's
No.
possible, but it's optimal, but it's not like designed well for it.
Yeah. I think the other piece of, as far as talking to strangers though, that maybe people don't like just doing that is because, and you see this kind of in the news about the term high trust society. Um, and I think that there's a lot of distrust maybe with lots of people moving around from different places and kind of the communities that once were there in terms of like a neighborhood, for instance, maybe are not so much there anymore. Like when when I was little, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, can the neighbor come watch like let the dog out?" And it's like, "Oh, no problem." It's like people knew their neighbors and they don't know their neighbors anymore. And so people get less trusting the less people that they know and just kind of put their head down and try and go about their life. So I think that's another kind of roadblock to that has to get solved for it at some point. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of community building. I've seen it myself. And hopefully, I mean, hopefully that gets solved because I think that will solve a lot of the other problems that we laid out by as a byproduct. So I don't know. We'll see. We will see for sure. I don't have any other questions that come to mind, and I know that you're on vacation, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But do you have any kind of last thoughts before we get you out of here?
No, I should I offer a question for the next guest? I was
Yeah,
actually
but afterwards,
oh,
they don't get to know. It's a surprise.
that's right, that's right. I was just thinking of a good one based on our conversation. I don't have any parting thoughts. I'm really happy to jam with you on all these ideas, and thank you for, you know, inviting me again and having me on your show. It's been a real pleasure, and we will do it again in some time. We should
Yeah.
just keep an Eric and Kira show started.
Yeah. We might have to do that. We'll put it on the informed web page or something. I don't know. The monthly news breakdown or something like that. I don't know. Just spitballing.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
like.
So for those listening, thank you for listening. Again, link will be in the description to Informed. As always, go check it out, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.